Joshua Abraham Norton was the first and longest reigning emperor of the United States of America, and I wish more people knew about him. In the 1850s, China had this extreme famine, forcing a halt on the export of rice and causing a sudden rice inflation in the United States. Rice got really expensive, and people needed rice. And so Joshua Abraham Norton was, the consummate entrepreneur. And he saw an opportunity because rice went from 4 cents per pound to 36 cents per pound. And any person with even a slight weakness for that type of business spirit will notice this, this opportunity. So what he tried to do is he tried to buy a ship filled with rice before it reached the port in San Francisco. And he was hoping he would have a monopoly on all the rice. And he was going to buy it at a discount. And then as soon as it got into the port, he was going to sell it and make millions of monies on rice. The whole thing went south. It did not work out. It failed for some reason. We're not exactly sure why. The courts, he filed for bankruptcy because he had dumped all of his money into this. And for 4 years, he tried suing the rice dealers. He fought Big Rice hard. And he tried to get out of his contract. The courts eventually ruled against Joshua, and in 1858, he filed for bankruptcy. Then, September 17th, 1859, Joshua Abraham Norton declared himself the Emperor of the United States. I mean, that's like what else would you do, right? You go bankrupt. Why not declare yourself the Emperor of the United States of America? Really, I mean, it's a Trump story, right? This is like an 1859 Trump story. Like, just tell everyone you're the emperor, until it's true. Here's his like announcement. At the peremptory request and desire of a large majority of citizens of these United States, right? He already has that confidence. Like, tons of people in America want me to be emperor. I, Joshua Norton, formerly of Algoa Bay, Cape of Good Hope, and now for the last 9 years and 10 months past, of San Francisco, California, declare and proclaim myself emperor of these U.S. states, and in virtue of the authority thereby in me vested, do hereby order and direct all the representatives of the United States of the Union to assemble in the music hall of this city on the 1st of February, and then to make alterations to the existing laws of the Union as may ameliorate the evils under which the country is laboring, and thereby cause confidence to exist both in home and abroad, and stability in our nation. So literally this guy goes broke, next day decides, I'm the Emperor of America, puts out the statement and says, I want all the representatives from all the states. They should gather and meet because we're going to figure this crap out. I love it. Like, the first time I came across this Wikipedia article, I was like, man, like this, like what a story of social media before social media. What a story of the struggle I have within myself. Like, declaring yourself something. Is it true? If I say I'm attractive, does that make me attractive? If I say I'm about equality, does that change me? If I like say this in all of social media, everything, it's not just a social media thing. Everything you do is about projecting yourself out into the world. Here's what I am. Here's what I'm about. This guy was crazy. This guy would just show up and just pretend to be the emperor of the United States. And he did it so much. So, I mean, he was just this like crazy broke guy who would walk around dressed up. I wish I could share my screen, but I don't want to interrupt my flow. He would just write in these laws into effect. He tried to ban the use of the word Frisco because he didn't like people referring to San Francisco as Frisco. He made all sorts of laws. At one point, he also declared himself protector of Mexico as well. So not only the Emperor of America, but protector of Mexico. He became such a personality in San Francisco that people just started playing into it. He just became like, he was like the original, I don't know if you guys remember, like the Fat Jewish on Instagram. He was like the original provocateur who just became this character that, as so often happens with, I don't know, high schoolers and young adults, it's like, sure, you're the Emperor of America. There goes the Emperor of America. He would walk into restaurants and people would just let him eat there because it was like, here comes the Emperor of America. And at what point does an inside joke just become reality, right? Like they would invite this guy to weddings to officiate. There was one time where a big riot broke out in San Francisco, and the myth goes that he walked right into the middle of this big riot. People are fighting, it's really tense. People are about to throw stuff, and people are, it's like this dangerous, violent situation. All of a sudden, here comes Joshua Norton, the Emperor of America, stands in the middle of the riot and just starts reciting the Our Father. And for some reason, everyone just decided, you know what, let's not fight today, and like went home. That's what the myth says, right? I started looking up. I found this really interesting, right? Because like we have these words, like a self-proclaimed guru. I know a lot of us here with any self-respect at all, like we don't dream of becoming, a self-proclaimed guru, like someone who just looks, I don't know, it looks slimy and sleazy, right? And so I was thinking about that. I was thinking about like that idea of a self-proclaimed something, like a self-proclaimed guru, a self-proclaimed expert, all of these things. And it's interesting, the origins of the phrase self-proclaimed are connected to other phrases, self-stylized, so-called. And it all goes back to this French phrase, I don't even know how to say French or speak French, so soi disant. But that phrase, where that comes from, the self-proclaimed, the phrase means literally to say oneself. To say oneself. And I thought, I don't know, I looked up in Google, you can see the search history or like the use of the word. And it seems like after the 1800s, the use of the word self-proclaimed, even this French soi disant, really like spikes. I think it was because of Emperor Joshua Norton. But I was thinking a lot more about this idea, like to say oneself. We say ourselves out into the world in social media, on our profiles. We say oneself when we're being creative, when we're making stuff out in the world. And there's some truth in saying, like, if you say a lie enough times, it's true. Like there's that saying, like there's this idea that we also have these ideas of like The Secret, right? Like, oh, if you just think it long enough, it'll become true. And there's all these different relationships I have with self-worth and who am I and how do I portray myself? And I really believe, I love this quote by the great boxer Roberto Duran. He said, "I am not God, but I am something similar." And we know this as Catholics, like we're not God, but we're made of God, and we're made to be like God. There's that famous quote, "God became man so that men might become God." And it's interesting, God himself is this trinity of persons, and the Father is perfect and one and infinite, and he has a conception of himself. He can perceive himself. He can think of himself. And that thought is so infinite and perfect and eternal that it's an exact replica, you might say, theologically inaccurate, but it's an exact replica of himself. It's the second person of the Trinity. It's an image of God. So the Father thinks of himself, and that image of himself is the Son. And it's interesting, again, the logos, right? The saying of oneself. Like that relationship, this connection between who we are and this like action of like the coming out, the breath of the person, it's there in the Trinity. Like God the Father thinks of himself and says himself into the world. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, the Word was God. God speaks one word of himself out into the world, and we get creation and revelation and you and me, right? It's almost like, this isn't in scripture, but it's almost like God saying to the world, to reality, to everything, like, I am God. And in him saying it, my son Ignatius, like as he was growing up, I'd say things like, oh, you're so funny, or you're so smart. And sometimes he would reply, no, I'm Ignatius, right? Like, and it's a really common thing for little kids, because they're not, no, I am Ignatius. I am not funny. I'm not smart. I'm not intelligent. But then as we get older, we start separating those two things a little more. And we go, well, no. I am funny. I am attractive. I am beautiful. And then there's the negative things that we tell ourselves too. Like, I am not good enough. I am insecure. I struggle with this, it's interesting too. Like in scripture, people were frustrated with Jesus because of this. They were like, just say who you are, right? In John 10, so the Jews gathered around him and said to him, how long are you going to keep us in suspense? Are you the Messiah? Tell us plainly. Jesus answers them, I told you and you did not believe. So I wanted to talk a little bit about these three areas: self-worth, knowing your self-worth from the Father, knowing your self-worth in your creative work, and then knowing your self-worth in client work. And so it'll get more and more practical. So I don't know. I've never done a talk kind of like this. That hopefully will have some really practical tools. And then I'd love to get people's feedback on this. Hopefully this is helpful. How are we doing in the chat? How are we doing right now? Is this good? Are we hitting on something? Do you guys all disagree with what I'm saying? Like, what's feed? I wish there was like an applause button, like the NBA or MLB, like the virtual. Okay. It's just my insecurities coming out right now. So, as I was thinking about talking to you guys, I think, knowing your worth from the Father, some of the things that came to mind, and I know, a lot of you guys, like, your faith, you probably I was thinking, what could I say that's interesting or different or something to contribute that, Bishop Barron or Father Mike Schmitz or someone you guys haven't already, heard or seen. And so I just wanted to draw your attention to a few things. Places you can go to learn your identity in Christ, to learn who you are. But I think especially like creatives, freelancers, those types of things, we can struggle with connecting our actions and our work with our identity. And part of it stems from not knowing our worth from the Father because of this heresy called Pelagianism. And so Pelagianism, this guy Pelagius thought that we could just choose to be good. We could just choose, like, all that was necessary was for someone to will themselves to be holy and good. And this seeps into this relationship we have with saying ourselves out into the world. You have to say something. I mean, I guess you could live your whole life as a mute, but that wouldn't be that fun. So you have to put something out into the world. And every time you put it out into the world, there's this tension between, is what I'm saying about myself true? Is what I'm saying about myself too idealistic? What do I say? What am I putting out? And Pelagianism creeps in when we think that an action we do changes our identity. So we can get really proud of our work, like, oh man, I'm getting really good at graphic design. I'm a graphic designer, right? And, there's good and bad things about that. It's always in the balance and the virtues in the mean. But really, man, it comes down to not attaching too closely your actions to your identity, because you can't earn your sonship or daughterhood of God. You can't get rid of it. You can't do anything that earns it. It's just part of your baptism. It's part of just being created, that God loves you and has a plan for you. So now let's move into, that's enough about knowing your worth and meditating. I mean, just look up the Emperor of America, man. It's crazy. Like, just meditate. What are the parts of this that make you feel uncomfortable? What are the parts of it that you think are like, true or good? Like, was he the Emperor of America? I mean, in some ways he acted like it. I think it's a really interesting story that we don't have time to go much deeper into. So I want to talk a little bit about knowing your worth in the creative process. Again, if we're tempted to attach our actions to our identity, we're tempted to see our creative work. When we put out our creative work into the world, it can get hurtful if someone misunderstands us or critiques us or isn't about your style. And so again, you're always having to kind of balance, is this constructive feedback that's true? Like, do I really suck? Or is this person's feedback not of importance to me? And any of you that know me know I'm a huge Gary Vaynerchuk fan. I love a lot of what his I don't know, would you call it his like he's constantly harping on this idea of being disconnected from the feedback and not being too attached to the praise or the criticism or the negative feedback. You have to be detached from both. And so if someone, if someone says, oh man, that's really great, you kind of take it with a grain of salt. And if someone says, oh, I hate this, you take it with a grain of salt because it's people's opinion. So a few things I would recommend as practicals for knowing your worth in the creative process. One thing is training or cultivating a sense of self-awareness about the narratives that go on in your head. And, we don't have time to go too deep into a lot of stuff. I just want to throw a lot of resources and practical things out your way. But Catholic Mindfulness by Dr. Gregory Bottaro, or from a secular perspective, just the app called Headspace. These are two really, really amazing practices on just the practice of cultivating mindfulness of what's going on in your headspace when you're thinking or when you're doing anything. When an emotion comes up, when you read a comment that bothers you, when someone says something, when you're analyzing a piece of work, a graphic design, a photo, something, when you're trying to get better, what are the narratives that are coming up, and realizing that those thoughts, these narratives are not you. They're thoughts that can have an impact on you. But like St. Ignatius of Loyola talks about discernment of spirits, there's always an opportunity for this to be a word that is just coming from you, a word from the evil one who's tempting you, or a word from the Lord himself, right? And there are different qualities of those types of things on you. So thinking about those things in the creative process is really important. The other thing I would recommend is there was in Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, he's this kind of behavioral psychologist, I think, type person. Anyways, he's analyzing like how we think, the way we think, and how all of that works, like our reasoning, our intuition, how those things fit together. And he talks about this study that they did where they took people and they had them read 500 words from a piece of paper. And that was it. And they told them that they were just studying people's speech patterns or something. But what they didn't tell them was that they were watching them after they left the experiment. So these people would come in, they're going to be part of this scientific experiment. They read this paper, they record them reading from this paper, and then they leave. They didn't realize that the scientists were actually spying on them and timing how long it took for them to get from the room that the science experiment was in to the elevator. And they gave 2 different scripts to read. One of the scripts had words in it like fast, young, youthful, athletic, strong. Another script had words like old, elderly, slow, these types of words. Turns out that the 2 scripts had an impact on how quickly most people would walk from the room to the elevator. There's some subconscious impact. If you read a lot of words about slow, you walk a little slower, just enough that a scientist could pick up on it, right? I think that kind of stuff is really fascinating. We don't want to get too supernatural, too superstitious about like, okay, let me wake up every morning and just say, I'm the most attractive man in the world. And maybe eventually that'll have an impact on me. But man, words have an impact on us below our conscious perception, right? And if as Catholics we look at that, we might see like, man, like the word has an impact on us spiritually. Like the word can change reality and me. Why would I not expect that on just on a physical level that words have an impact? Because something about God is reflected in us. I'm not like God, but I am something similar. And so we can see these things back and forth, these reflections. So the words we tell ourselves in the creative process are really like to cultivate an awareness of what those narratives are really, really important. And another thing Dr. Gregory Bottaro recommends is writing stuff down, writing down the things that are the narrative going on in your head when you're participating in some type of work or process. Another study I wanted to bring up is they did a study where they told 2 groups of people, maybe you've heard this, a lot of creative people have maybe heard this, but they told 2 groups of people to, they gave them 2 different instructions on constructing pots. one group of people, they said, we want you to make the perfect pot, like as best of a pot as you can make. Make one pot as good as you can make it. They told another group of people, we want you to make as many pots as possible. What they found was that the group of people that they said, make a really, really good pot, took forever. They had no experience making pots at this point too. They just were a random group of people, make as good of a pot as you can. And they were frozen by, oh, I got to make the perfect pot. Is it going to, how big is it going to be? How small? How about the handle? How are we going to do it? So they were frozen. And they ended up making a mediocre pot. When they told the other group of people, make as many pots as possible, that group, without even much effort, got better and better at making pots without even really realizing it. Just make a pot, make another pot, make another pot. Focus on just showing up and doing the work every single time. And over time, they found that those people, by the end of the experiment, the end of the same amount of time, the people who weren't focusing on making perfect got way better at making pots. I think that's another thing about knowing your worth in the creative process, knowing that it's a journey, it's a process, and it's just about showing up and doing the work. It's not about being this narrative about, I got to make a perfect photo, a perfect graphic design. I got to be perfect. This is a process. There's a statistic that I was joking with a friend. There's some type of statistic that says that like 80% of businesses fail in the first, 2 years or something. All statistics are made up, 70% of them. But there's some statistic like some 80% of businesses fail in the first 2 years or whatever. And my friend told me that. He's like, how do you feel like that? And I said, that's because the people that are real business people, they're never out of business. They are the business, right? People that have this like, oh, I got to make one perfect business. And if it fails, that business has failed. Whereas when you're more process driven, you're like, man, this is just one iteration of the business that is me. And maybe right now we sell subscription boxes, and then later we're going to make shoes, but it's just me. And you don't see it as, oh man, I tried this thing and then it failed. I never, someone asked me like, do you have any failed businesses in your past? I guess I'd be like, okay, sure. But I've never been out of it. It's always just me. It's just me trying stuff. So anyway, so that's knowing your worth in the creative process. Some recommendations, mindfulness meditation, prayer, obviously. Look up Catholic mindfulness, Dr. Gregory Bottaro. Build more pots, not the perfect pot. And not being too attached to the praise or the criticism, knowing that like your action, once it's out in the world, it's a thing. Now we can just criticize it. It has no bearing on my identity and my purpose and my worth. Okay, so now I want to get into some like, this is the real jam here. Okay, so prepare your hearts, guard them. So I want to talk a little bit about, I was thinking, man, this is a great group to talk to. And I want to talk about money. Let's talk about money, because knowing your worth, obviously a lot of us, first thing is someone calls you up and goes, how much do you cost for X? And everything we've been talking about, in my experience, when I first got started in client work or talking money with people, all of that stuff, if you haven't worked on all of that stuff beforehand, it all comes up in that conversation. So a few things about money. We're just going to go straight into money. I hope this is what you guys wanted. Here we go. Okay. I'm just going to lay it on you. Old Uncle Edmund's just going to lay his thoughts down. A few things about money. So money doesn't have any emotion about you. Money doesn't have any emotions about you. If we were to lay $100,000 on this table here, I'm going to feel some emotions about it because I'm a weak person, right? And I have all this baggage about $100,000. Now, $100,000 represents something to me because of my past experiences, because of how poor or rich I might have lived and grown up. I'm already, based on other quantities I know, I'm already relating that amount of money to how much more than my salary might that amount be? How many years would I have to work to get $100,000? what's like the most expensive car? Like what's a car that might cost around $100,000? I might think if I live in California, I might be like, man, $100,000 wouldn't buy you a room in a hotel or so, like, I don't know. Is it like, and out in Texas, $100,000, like, I mean, you could buy like, I don't know, maybe a 2-bedroom, house somewhere outside of Fort Worth, right? Like $100,000. I have a lot of emotions about the money, but the money doesn't have emotions about you. The money does not have emotions about you. I remember in college one time getting in an argument with a friend. We were talking about money, and she said the love of money, or she said, I just hate money. I hate all this money stuff. I wish we didn't have to worry about this money stuff. She said, money is the root of all evil. And I was like, no, you got the scripture wrong. The scripture is the love of money is the root of all evil. 1 Timothy 6:20. So we'll back up a little bit though. Before there, I think that I might have got the, I'm Catholic. I don't know where the scripture verse is, but it's in there. He says this, for we brought nothing into the world, just as we shall not be able to take anything out of it. If we have food and clothing, we'll be content with that. Those who want to be rich are falling into temptation and into a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires, which plunge them into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all evils. And some people in their desire for it have strayed from the faith and have pierced themselves with many pains. Now, I'm not a Joel Osteen prosperity gospel kind of guy, but that doesn't mean that we have to, like, it is true that money is a part of our reality, right? And if we're working as creatives, for some reason, we can't do it all for free. Unless you want to, which you could. You could decide to do a graphic design ministry where you do all of it for free. But if you're trying to support yourself, you have to charge money. And so in the scripture verse, I just wanted to point out, it's the love of money, which some people stray from the faith and have pierced themselves with many pains. So to me, that's some guidance in terms of discernment. As long as I'm in a state of grace, I'm connected to my identity in the Father, I can do business as long as I'm aware of whether or not I am straying, piercing myself with many pains, and straying from the faith. So I want to encourage you some practicals. I want to encourage you, one, to do a Google search and look up value-based pricing. Value-based pricing. I think if you have not heard, maybe you've already heard of this, but you have not heard of value-based pricing, there's a few places. Jonathan Stark does a lot of work in this area. He has a whole bunch of work on like hourly billing is nuts. And if someone asks you how much do you charge per hour, in my opinion, if you're a freelance creative, I would stay away from hourly billing as much as possible. Because when you stick to hourly billing, you're a technician, right? And at the beginning, that might be where you want to start, right? Like everyone starts somewhere and you just want to, you're just crazy that someone wants to give you any type of money, right? The first 1 or 2 projects, someone wants to give you money for something. It's like, shoot, I can't believe this is crazy. But if you stay at hourly pricing, in my opinion, you're being seen as a technician to your client. So your client comes to you and says, oh, it costs $50 to take photos. And that's it. Whereas when you start shifting to value-based pricing, now you start becoming a partner, a problem solver, right? Because in value-based pricing, you're asking them, you're having a conversation with them, and you're saying, what is the value of this work? How can I help you see value in this thing that you're about to do? So earlier when I was talking about money has no emotions with you, knowing your worth as a freelancer means knowing that you're worth money, and you should be trying to increase your worth. Now, you're going to have to decide at what point you're too expensive, but that you're going to be going through this relationship with the market. So the market is going to be telling you whether or not you're too expensive. The market's going to be telling you whether or not you're skilled enough at that price point. So of all the friends I know, I charge the most. I push the limit aggressively because I've been taken advantage of in the other extreme. Now, I'll say this though, even though I charge the most, there have been times where I've had to tell someone, if you're looking for someone, for instance, here's a good example. I was working with a client who had a budget of around 20 grand for a promo video. And I want you to ask yourself, like, what would you, if someone said, I want to pay you 20 grand to work for me, what would you do for them? Just for like let's say a weekend project. That's a good thought experiment. What would you do for a client? Think of whatever you charge right now, photography, graphic design, video editing, whatever. Whatever you're doing right now, if your client came to you and said, I want to give you $20,000 to do exactly, what extra would you do on top of that? Be like, shoot, man, I'll freaking iron your pants. I'll babysit your kids, right? Like, I will take this graphic design and I will carve it into a piece of wood for you, right? I've had to tell people before that if you want, if you're looking to spend 20 grand on a promo video, I'm not your guy. I'm not yet at the skill level that I could give you something for that amount. But we do want to be increasing our worth. So here's a good rule of thumb. In my experience, your first 6 months of client work, if COVID happened, you're like, man, I'm starting to kind of ask around, doing some client works, client services. Your first 6 months, I would double your prices every time someone new comes in and asks you, how much do you charge for X? I would double your prices. Now, here's the thing, with this rule of thumb, it's way easier to come down from a price than to go up. It's way easier to say, hey man, I charge $1,000 to do a photo session. And your friend go, oh, what? And you go, all right, well, how much do you have? That's way easier than someone coming to you and saying, how much do you charge for a photo session? You say, I don't know, maybe $100. And they go, great. And then they take 10 hours of your time. And you're like, I hated this. And you try to go back to your friend and say, hey man, do you think you could give me $200? Like, this was a lot of work, right? It's much better to be in a situation where you seem like a really nice guy because you're coming down than going up, right? The other thing is, another kind of rule of thumb is I would double your prices and I would not get scared the first 3 to 5 times that someone tells you you're too expensive. So as long as you're getting some work coming in and you're doing work and you're putting it out in the world, I mean, if you talk to people that have been doing client services for a while, I mean, a lot of people don't understand the price of anything. I mean, like, I was just talking to a guy the other day. He's like, I have like $200. Can you make me a website? I was like, dude, you're better off just going to Wix.com and making your own free website, right? So a lot of people just don't understand. I mean, the market doesn't really understand the value of a lot of creative work. So you have that you're fighting up against. Here's the other thing you're fighting up against is most of your friends and family don't understand the value of creative services and work, right? So it's a different mind shift to get into. Now, all that being said, you have to discern this. You have to know your worth from the Father. You have to be in a good place of discernment. You have to know the creative process, know that this is a long process. And you have to, I mean, you have to have this self-confidence in your self-worth to know, to not charge what you're worth today, but to charge what the level that you're trying to get to. Now, granted, you got to stair step up to it. You can't just go, man, I want to be Chase Jarvis. I want to be a photographer that charges, $1 million per shoot or whatever. So tomorrow I'm going to buy a camera and I'm going to start asking for $1 million, right? You got to stair step up to it, but you got to see the process. You have to see the journey. You're always in business, right? You're always trying. So I'd look up some of those things. A few other, because we're running out of time here. A few other things I just want to point you in the direction. There's a series for those of you who are like getting into client service. Maybe if this is the first like 2 years of client work for you, graphic design, whatever, logo design, social media management, I would highly recommend a series on YouTube. And after this, now that I'm saying all this, I'll make a web page and put all these links and stuff on my website so you guys can find them and make sure you find them. But there's a YouTube channel called The Future with no E. The Future with no E. And there's a series on there with Melinda. And so it's a series of coaching sessions where this guy from the future, it's an agency, he coaches Melinda up from being a technician design person to becoming more of this consultant, partner, value-based pricing, those conversations. There is no other series of YouTube videos that has had more of an impact on the way I approach client services, creative services, than that. And then here's the last thing. Here's the last, like, I just wanted to give you guys bangers. I don't know if this was a great talk, but I just wanted to give you like as many pieces of information that I think would be really helpful as possible. This again will be a huge mindset shift. When I heard this, I was like, man, I've never even thought about doing this. I would strongly encourage you to start practicing this as well when people are contacting you for client work, to try this. Find a friend who does something similar to what you do. So let's say you're a graphic designer. This is a great way to start shifting into consulting and a different level of client services, right? So let's say you're pretty good at graphic design. And let's say often you have people approach you about t-shirt design. After you have like 6 months or, I don't know, 10 to 12 projects under your belt, find another friend, find someone that's either at your level or a little below, like, or maybe a little above, but just someone around your skill level, and ask them their rates. Say, hey, if someone approaches me for a t-shirt design and I don't have time for it, what are your rates? So I can tell them, your rates. Or just like in general, like someone that you're comfortable enough with that they would share with you their rates. So the next time a client comes to you and says, how much do you charge for t-shirt design? Double the price of your friend's rate, and then see if the client accepts, and then go to your friend and say, hey, here's the deal. I have a client that I want to work with, and I want to partner with you on this. I want to pay you the rate that you want to make. And I want to like manage this relationship. I want to work with the client. I want to work with you. I want to get you paid, and I want to like manage this and oversee and try doing that. It totally shifts your mindset, right? Because now instead of you doing the actual work, you're having to work with someone and through someone, and it shifts. You start thinking more like the client. You start thinking, if I was paying someone to do this, and you're having a higher level of expertise than the client would even have seeing into that graphic design. You're like, no, the transparency is kind of, we need to adjust this. The resolution's not up where. And this is going to be, I love doing this. I love going to my friends and saying, how much do you charge for a website? And let's just say, these are all fake numbers, but like, let's say my friend says, I charge $1,000 for a website. And so my client, if a client comes to me and says, hey, do you design websites? And I say, it's $2,000. And they say, okay, great, let's work together. And then I go back to my friend and say, hey man, actually, I want to pay you $1,500. Let's work together on this project. Me and you are going to work together with this client and do this project together. That's another thing I think most people don't even think about that. They're just like, I got to do all the work. And that was a total mind shift. And maybe you find that you don't want to do that. You just want to be a technician. Then find other people that are really good at the client seeking out, the client management. Maybe you love to just be in the graphic design stuff and just work on the design. At least trying that a few times, you're going to find your earning potential is going to be bigger. Your experience talking to a client or talking to the creative is going to increase. That was a huge, totally shifted my experience with client services. All right. So that's pretty much all I got, Jen. I'm sorry. That was a lot.
That was great. That was awesome. I have like a whole thing of notes here. So that was great for me. We'll do a brief Q&A if you have time, Edmund. Awesome. If anyone has questions, if you want to put it in the chat, we have time for about 2 to 3 questions. So yeah, drop them there. Thank you very much. That was awesome.
So I wish that would have been like a more, edited and curated talk, but it's kind of how this is. I wish it would have ended on a more inspiring, like, David Calavita, Chris Stefanik, like go take over the world and make everyone in your neighborhood a saint. But I wanted to be pretty practical. So yeah, I would love it if we had some questions
Definitely. First one that we have here is, how can I put myself out there to attract clients?
I mean, showing up every single day somewhere. So, I mean, obviously social media, but I would just show up yeah, I'm not going to have advice that you're not going to already know. I mean, it's like showing up every single day, telling the journey. I mean, if you know Gary Vaynerchuk at all of my advice I'm going to tell you right now is just Gary Vaynerchuk. Like, don't wait until you're an expert. Start sharing your journey now. Like every day, show up and go, I'm trying to get clients and I'm a graphic designer. Today I tried this. Like just keep sharing. I'm trying to work on Adobe After Effects and I'm learning this skill. Like you just got to keep sharing that journey and that process. And then the other thing I'd say is like, think like your client, right? You want to make things as easy as possible for your client. So, where is your, I mean, if it's small businesses, if it's like, yeah, if it's small restaurants, like where do people that run small restaurants, where do they hang out? Are they on LinkedIn? Are they on Facebook? What are they worried about right now? How do you help them give value, give for free on social media? And then, put your little, hey, contact me here in the bio.
Awesome. And then how do we navigate pricing when it comes to working for the church?
Okay. So I didn't know how much to go into that, but I have a whole experience of really, I mean, client services, for me, that started out with people hiring me to speak. And then it navigated into like graphic design, video editing, the more creative stuff. And then I also work for the church. So a few things I'll just say really quickly. I mean, this could be a whole nother topic, a big topic. Here's what I'll say. As someone who has experience being hired by parishes, dioceses, and who also has hired other people, like, has like gone through the process of hiring speakers, musicians, put on conferences and stuff. And then also, I just want to mention, I have both been hired as an employee, but I also manage, like I supervise employees. So I have that. I'm hedging all of what I'm about to say because like sometimes it comes across as a little, and your mileage may vary. I mean, you got to pray. I can't do the discernment for you. But what I will say is, you have a responsibility to charge a just and high amount, not just to yourself, but to other people who work for the church. In my opinion, in very rare cases, I mean, unless it's a mission parish or you feel called to ministry for free, in my opinion, if you allow a church to pay you an unfortunately low rate, not only are you hurting yourself, you are hurting the quality of that type of work in the church. You are hurting other people who are trying to make a living in the church, right? I can't tell you how many times, and a lot of times it's not anyone's, like they're not trying to be bad. Again, people are inexperienced with handling money. And so they have a lot of emotions around money. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard friends or I've heard stories of like someone gets asked how much they charge for something, let's say speaking or musician or graphic design. And then that person said, well, it's a church. Okay, well, we charge this much. And they say, oh, and internally behind closed doors, they go, oh, thank goodness. Our budget was 3 times that, but now we get to save all that money. And that's messed up. That's messed up. I personally would much rather pay people an amount of money that gets them excited about the project. That's me. Not everyone is that way, but I think you owe it to yourself and to other people in the church to charge a fair amount. And it's always easier to go high and come down than it is to go, well, it's a church, right? I mean, yeah, I think I could talk a ton more about that, but that's what I would say is you are not doing anyone, especially when people first start out, they just feel bad talking about money with church and ministry. And there's a lot of other people that don't feel that bad, and you're going to get taken advantage of. So just, the church deserves high quality work, Anyways, I don't know if that helps at all. I'm a mess.
That's perfect. Thank you. And then last one, how do you process failing a client? So if you've worked with a client and they're unsatisfied with the final product.
I think maybe they could clarify. Oh, Benny.
Yeah.
Do you so it depends on your contract. So if you've said you only get one revision and then they get the revision, they're like, oh, I don't like this. I mean, this just kind of like, well, if you mean how do you process a client who maybe you don't have a really solid agreement in a contract and they're like, I'm just really upset. I don't know. I mean, I think I'd have to, maybe Benny. Okay. How do you process like a relationship where it's just not getting great? I mean, there's a few ways. I mean, I would always much rather over deliver and lose money and end the relationship. So like do everything I can to just say, you know what? Like, here's what I'm going to do. I'll refund you everything and we're going to cut ties pretty cleanly. But I'd highly recommend the book Boundaries. Read the book Boundaries. That's another thing I think is you just have to have those strong boundaries and just say, another piece of advice I think that's really helpful. I would really look into brand strategy or just strategy, like design thinking, that type of stuff. Because oftentimes when someone says, I don't like something, you can't argue with that. But if you can shift and pivot towards the goal was X, you said Y, our plan was Z. I feel like we accomplished this. What are you not? Can you give me what aren't you liking about this? Get more detailed. I don't know. That's kind of vague thoughts. I feel like Benny, if we were to talk back and forth, would probably be able to get a little bit better, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. That might not have been super helpful, but read the book Boundaries, man. Another life-changing book. Read the book Boundaries. I forget who it's by. Some smart guy.